Before we dive in, it's important to state that the information in this presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional educational, financial, or legal advice. Every family situation is unique, and you should always consult with qualified professionals before making major decisions about your child's education. You're staring at a list of schools. You see the familiar names: Lincoln Elementary, Jefferson Middle School, Northwood High. These are the traditional public schools, the ones funded by your property taxes, the ones run by the local school district. Then you see the private schools, the ones with fancy names and even fancier tuition fees. But then your eyes land on a third category. A name like KIPP Aspire Academy, or Success Academy, or Da Vinci Design Charter School. It says it's a public school, but it feels different. It says there's no tuition, but you have to apply through a lottery. What exactly is this thing? Is it public? Is it private? Is it some kind of hybrid experiment using our kids as test subjects? If you've ever felt that confusion, you are not alone. Because that third option, the charter school, has quietly become one of the most powerful and controversial forces in American education. Right now, as you're watching this, over 3.7 million children in the United States are attending a charter school. That is more than the entire population of the city of Chicago. There are nearly 8,000 of these schools across 45 states, operating with a staggering $44 billion of public taxpayer money. This isn't a niche alternative anymore. It's a parallel public education system that is growing at an explosive rate, and it has ignited a firestorm of a debate that pits teachers against reformers, parents against politicians, and communities against corporations. So what's the big deal? Proponents will tell you that charter schools are the silver bullet. They're laboratories of innovation, free from the crushing bureaucracy and red tape of traditional school districts. They claim charters offer parents a desperately needed choice, especially in underserved communities where traditional schools have been failing for generations. They are, in this view, lean, agile startups that can tailor education to a child's specific needs, leading to higher test scores and brighter futures. But the critics? They paint a very different picture. They argue that charter schools are a Trojan horse for the privatization of public education. They say charters drain billions of dollars in vital funding from traditional public schools, leaving the most vulnerable students behind. They point to scandals involving fraud, mismanagement, and a teach-to-the-test culture that stifles true learning. They see a system with less public oversight, weaker teacher protections, and a troubling tendency to cherry-pick the easiest students to educate. Who is right? The truth is, both sides have a point, and navigating this maze of claims and counterclaims is nearly impossible for the average parent just trying to do what's best for their kid. That is why we made this video. Our goal is to cut through all of it, the political spin, the media hype, and the confusing jargon. By the time you're done watching, you will understand in crystal clear terms what a charter school is, how it gets your tax dollars, who is actually in charge of it, and most importantly, you will have a powerful framework to analyze whether a charter school is the right choice for your family and your community. To really get it, you have to stop thinking about it like a traditional school. Think of it like a startup. Imagine the local school district. Let's call it Megacorp Education. It's huge, it's been around for 100 years, and it has a rulebook for everything. It's stable, predictable, but also slow to change. Now, imagine a group of passionate teachers or community leaders has a radical new idea for a school. Maybe they want to focus on STEM or the arts or bilingual education. They can't execute their vision inside the rigid structure of mega corporation. So they decide to launch a startup. They write up a detailed business plan. This plan outlines everything: their unique educational philosophy, their curriculum, their budget, how they'll measure success, who they'll hire, and the type of students they want to serve. This business plan is their charter. They then pitch this charter not to the school district but to an authorizer, usually a state university, a special state board, or sometimes even the local district itself. If the authorizer likes the plan, they approve it. They grant the charter. This charter is a legal contract, typically for 3 to 5 years. It's a performance-based contract that says, in essence, we, the state, will give you public tax dollars for every student you enroll. You will be free from most of the local district's rules and regulations. In exchange, you must deliver the results you promised in this contract. If you succeed, we'll renew your charter. If you fail, we will shut you down. And that is the grand bargain. That is the fundamental DNA of every charter school in America. Public funding in exchange for public accountability, with operational freedom in between. This idea didn't just appear out of thin air. It was born out of profound frustration. Let's go back to the late 1980s. The nation was in a panic about its schools. A famous report called A Nation at Risk declared a rising tide of mediocrity in public education. Everyone agreed something had to change, but nobody could agree on what. Then, a man named Albert Shanker, the head of the nation's second-largest teachers' union, of all people, gave a speech. He was no radical privatization advocate. He was a pillar of the education establishment. But he saw a system that was failing too many kids and frustrating its best teachers. He proposed a new idea. What if we empowered small groups of teachers to create their own unique schools within the public system? What if we gave them a charter to operate, freeing them from the central office bureaucracy to try new things? His vision was for these to be research and development labs for the entire public school system. The best ideas would be shared and everyone would benefit. In 1991, Minnesota took his idea and ran with it, passing the nation's first charter school law. The first school to open, City Academy, was a tiny storefront school for students who had dropped out of the traditional system. It wasn't a sleek, corporate-backed enterprise. It was a gritty last-chance safety net run by a handful of dedicated teachers. They weren't trying to compete with the public school district. They were trying to complement it. But that small, humble idea, teacher-led labs of innovation, quickly morphed into something far bigger and far more complicated. Entrepreneurs, education reform foundations, and brand new for-profit and non-profit management organizations saw a massive opportunity. They saw a way to scale the startup model, creating national networks of charter schools with standardized curriculums and powerful branding. This brings us back to that core definition. A charter school is a public school. Let's be very clear about that. They cannot charge tuition. They cannot have special entrance exams. They must be open to all students. They receive public money, your tax dollars, on a per-pupil basis, just like a traditional public school. The key difference isn't the funding source, it's the governance. A traditional public school is run by the local school district and managed by a publicly elected school board. A charter school is run by its own independent board of directors, according to the rules laid out in its specific charter. This independence is their superpower and their greatest vulnerability. It allows them to have a longer school day, to require parent contracts, to hire non-union teachers, or to build their entire curriculum around robotics. But this freedom from the system also creates a profound and urgent question. When you give a school public money but free it from direct public control, who is truly holding it accountable? What happens when the startup's mission to innovate clashes with its need to survive financially? And does this grand experiment in school choice actually create better schools? Or does it just create a more fractured, unequal system for everyone? The answer is a messy, complicated, and absolutely critical story about the future of education in America. And untangling that story is exactly what we are about to do. To understand what a charter school is, you have to start with a single radical idea. An idea that came from one of the most unexpected places imaginable. What if I told you the concept that would eventually threaten the power of teachers' unions and traditional school districts was first championed by the head of a teachers' union? It sounds impossible, but it's true. In 1988, Albert Shanker, the brilliant and often combative president of the American Federation of Teachers, stood up and proposed something revolutionary. He saw a public education system that felt stuck. A massive bureaucratic machine that was great at standardization but terrible at innovation. Teachers were often treated like assembly line workers, handed a curriculum and told to follow the script, regardless of whether it was working for the kids in front of them. Shanker's vision was to empower those very teachers. He imagined small, experimental schools operating within the public school system. Schools designed and run by teachers themselves, free from the district's red tape, to try out new ideas. Maybe one school would focus on project-based learning. Another might try a year-round calendar. They would be laboratories of innovation. And the best ideas, the ones that actually worked, they would be brought back to improve the entire system for everyone. He called them charter schools. The name itself is the entire concept in a nutshell. A charter school is born from a charter. Think of it as a contract, a performance agreement. A group of people, maybe educators, parents, or a community organization, goes to an authorizer, which is usually a state agency, a university, or a local school district, and they make a pitch. They say, "We have a new, better way to educate children. Here is our mission. Here is our curriculum. Here are the results we promise to achieve." If the authorizer agrees, they grant them a charter, a contract that typically lasts for 3 to 5 years. This charter is the key to everything. It is the legal document that creates the school. And here's the most important and most misunderstood part. That school is a public school. This is not a private school. Charter schools cannot charge tuition. They cannot have special admissions tests or screen out students based on academic ability or disability. They are funded by public tax dollars. Just like the traditional elementary or high school down the street, they are open to all. So if they're public schools, what's the big deal? It all comes down to what's been called the grand bargain. In exchange for that charter, the school gets something extraordinary: autonomy, freedom. While a traditional public school has to follow a mountain of rules from the district and the state, about everything from what textbooks to use, to how long the school day is, to who they can hire and how they can pay them, a charter school is largely exempt from those rules. Want to create a school day that's 2 hours longer to provide more art and music? You can do that. Want to build your entire curriculum around environmental science and hold half your classes outdoors? Go for it. Want to require all students to learn computer coding starting in kindergarten? You have the freedom to try. This autonomy allows them to specialize. You see charter schools focused on STEM, on classical literature, on dual language immersion, on serving students with autism. The idea is that this freedom will unleash innovation, allowing schools to tailor their programs to the specific needs of their students, rather than being forced into a one-size-fits-all model. It's the freedom to hire the teachers they think are the best fit, and the freedom to let go of teachers who aren't performing, without the complex tenure rules that govern most school districts. It is, in theory, the freedom to be better. But that freedom comes with a very sharp edge. This is the other side of the grand bargain: accountability. In that charter, that contract, the school made promises. They promised to raise test scores by a certain amount. They promised a certain graduation rate. They promised to meet specific educational goals. And if they fail to keep those promises, the authorizer can shut them down permanently. The contract is revoked, the doors are closed, and the school ceases to exist. This is the fundamental difference. A traditional public school, no matter how poorly it performs for decades, will almost never be shut down. A charter school, however, lives with a constant, existential threat: perform or perish. This autonomy for accountability model was the engine of the idea. And in 1991, Minnesota became the first state to pass a law allowing it. A year later, the very first charter school in America opened its doors. It wasn't some elite academy for the gifted. It was called City Academy, located in St. Paul. And its mission was to serve students who had already dropped out or were on the verge of dropping out of traditional high schools. It was the perfect embodiment of Shanker's original vision: a small, nimble school created to solve a problem the big system was failing to address. But what happened next is the story of how a simple teacher-led idea morphed into a political supernova. Shanker's vision of small, innovative labs within the system was quickly co-opted by a much larger, more aggressive movement: the school choice movement. Conservatives and free market advocates looked at the charter concept and saw something else entirely. They didn't just see a laboratory. They saw a crowbar to pry open the monopoly of the public school system. They saw competition. The theory was simple economics. If you give parents the choice to leave a failing school for a better charter school, the traditional schools will be forced to improve to compete for students and the dollars that follow them. It was a market-based solution for education. At the same time, a new wave of Democrats, particularly in urban areas, saw a different kind of promise. They saw generations of minority students, particularly Black and Hispanic children, trapped in chronically underfunded and underperforming schools, run by massive, unmovable bureaucracies. For them, charter schools weren't about free market ideology. They were a matter of social justice. They were a lifeline, a way to create better schools right now for kids who couldn't afford to wait for the entire system to fix itself. It was a moral imperative. And so this idea, born from a union leader's desire to empower teachers, was suddenly being championed by Wall Street financiers, conservative think tanks, and civil rights activists alike. Everyone saw in the charter school model a reflection of their own hopes for fixing American education. But they also saw a weapon to be used against their opponents. The stage was set for an explosion in growth, and with it an ideological war. Because while the idea of creating new, innovative public schools sounds simple and wonderful, the moment you start talking about how to actually do it, how you fund them, who gets to run them, and which students get to attend them, you unleash a storm of controversy. So if the initial idea was so simple, and the goal so seemingly noble, why did it become one of the most bitter, divisive fights in modern America? The answer starts with one simple, powerful word: money. The answer starts with one simple, powerful word: money. To understand the war over charter schools, you first have to understand how we pay for public education in America. It's a system that, on the surface, seems fair. For every single student that walks through the doors of a public school, the school district receives a certain amount of money from the state and local government. This is called per-pupil funding. Think of it like this: every child essentially has a backpack, and at the start of the school year the government stuffs it with, say, $10,000. That $10,000 is meant to cover their share of everything: the teacher's salary, the lights in the classroom, the history textbook, the janitor who cleans the hallways, the principal who runs the school. When that child attends their local traditional public school, they walk in, unzip the backpack, and hand that money over to the district. Simple enough. The charter school revolution was built on an equally simple idea: choice. What if that child and their parents could choose to take that backpack of money to a different public school? A charter school? This is the central pillar of the charter school funding model. The money follows the child. It sounds like the purest form of a free market solution applied to education. If a traditional public school is failing, parents can vote with their feet. They take their child and their child's funding to a charter school that promises better results. The charter school gets the money, and the traditional school, now with one less student, gets less money. Creates competition. It forces the old, supposedly inefficient system to improve or risk losing more and more students and more money until it's forced to close. Survival of the fittest applied to schools. Proponents of this system say this is the ultimate form of accountability. Why should a school be guaranteed funding if it's not delivering a quality education? The money belongs to the student, not the system. It should be used to provide the best possible education for that specific child, wherever that may be. Charters, they argue, are often more efficient. They're not shackled by massive administrative bureaucracies or rigid union contracts, so they can do more with that $10,000 than the district school can. They can innovate, try new teaching methods, and be more responsive to the needs of their students. But here's where the simple idea gets incredibly complicated, and where the fight truly begins. Because a school isn't like a coffee shop. If a coffee shop loses 10% of its customers, it can just buy 10% less milk and coffee beans. Its variable costs go down. A school district's budget doesn't work that way. Imagine a school district with 1,000 students. A new charter school opens up down the street and draws away 100 of those students. That's 10%. So the district loses 10% of its funding. 100 backpacks full of cash just walked out the door. But did the district's costs go down by 10%? Not even close. The district still has to heat the same school building. It still has to pay the mortgage on that building. It still has to pay the principal's salary. It still has to run the same number of school buses, maybe now with more empty seats. It still has to pay for the district superintendent, the IT department, and the human resources staff. These are what economists call fixed costs, or in the world of education finance, stranded costs. They are the massive, unmovable expenses that don't disappear just because a few dozen, or even a few hundred students leave. So the district is left in an impossible situation. It has 90% of the funding but maybe 98% of the costs. What gives? Well, the things that can be cut get cut. The art teacher who splits her time between 3 schools is the first to go. The music program is scaled back. The school library buys fewer books. Class sizes start to creep up from 25 students to 28, then to 30. The after-school tutoring program is eliminated. Opponents of charters call this a death spiral. They argue that charters don't just take students. They skim the most engaged students with the most involved parents, leaving the traditional public schools with a higher concentration of the most expensive students to educate. Students with severe disabilities, students who are new to the country and don't speak English, or students experiencing homelessness. The traditional public school is legally required to accept and serve every single child who walks through its doors, no matter the cost. Charters, as we'll see later, often aren't. So the traditional school is left with less money to educate a more challenging student population. As its programs get cut and its quality declines, more parents look for an exit, and the charter school down the street starts to look even more attractive. More students leave, taking their backpacks of money with them, and the spiral accelerates. From this perspective, charter schools aren't competing with public schools. They're cannibalizing them, draining the host system of the resources it needs to survive, all while claiming to be the solution. This financial battle is a war of attrition fought in every state house and every school board meeting in America. But it gets even more controversial when you ask the next logical question. Where exactly is all this public money going? The initial promise of charter schools was that they would be nonprofit, community-based organizations, publicly funded but independently run. And today, the vast majority of charter schools, around 90%, are legally registered as nonprofit entities. But that label can be incredibly misleading, because while the school itself might be a nonprofit, the organization that runs it, manages its finances, hires its teachers, and writes its curriculum is very often a for-profit corporation. These are called EMOs, or Education Management Organizations. Sometimes you'll hear them called CMOs, for Charter Management Organizations. Think of the nonprofit charter school as a storefront, like a local McDonald's franchise. But the EMO is the McDonald's Corporation. It's a private, for-profit company that provides a turnkey operation. They handle the messy business of running a school, and in return they take a significant cut of those public tax dollars, those backpacks full of cash. This is where the debate explodes. Critics see a massive, deliberate loophole. They see private corporations siphoning public education funds away from classrooms and into the pockets of shareholders and executives. They point to EMOs that charge their own nonprofit schools exorbitant management fees, sometimes as high as 15 or 20% of their total budget. They point to shady real estate deals where the for-profit EMO buys a building, then leases it back to its own nonprofit charter school at an inflated price, effectively funneling public money directly into its own real estate portfolio. The money trail becomes murky, hidden behind layers of corporate structures. Is this public money being spent on better teachers and smaller class sizes? Or is it paying for a CEO's salary at a corporate headquarters 1,000 miles away? To critics, this isn't innovation. It's privatization. It's the slow, methodical dismantling of a public good for private gain. Defenders of the model, however, say this is simply the cost of doing business and bringing in professional expertise. They argue that educators aren't accountants or real estate experts. EMOs provide critical back-office support and operational efficiency that a small independent school could never afford on its own. They bring economies of scale, standardized curriculums, and proven models that can be replicated to serve more students effectively. They argue that as long as the school is producing great academic results, who cares about the corporate structure behind it? The goal is to educate children, not to prop up a particular type of bureaucratic system. To them, the focus on for-profit EMOs is a red herring, a scare tactic used by defenders of a failed status quo to stifle competition and protect their monopoly. So now we have two parallel school systems, both funded by the same public tax dollars, but locked in a bitter financial struggle. One system says the money should follow the child to create choice and competition. The other says that system is designed to bleed traditional schools dry, leaving the most vulnerable students behind in a collapsing structure. And underneath it all is a growing multi-billion-dollar industry of private companies that has figured out how to turn public education into a source of private profit. The fight over money is fierce. But it's what that money buys that truly defines this battle. It buys influence. It buys lobbyists. And most importantly, it buys the ability to operate under a different set of rules. Because when you look past the balance sheets and follow the money, you find that it leads to an even more fundamental question. Are these two systems, the traditional and the charter, truly being held to the same standard? Are they even playing the same game? When you look past the balance sheets and follow the money, you find that it leads to an even more fundamental question. Are these two systems, the traditional and the charter, truly being held to the same standard? Are they even playing the same game? Imagine two basketball teams. Both are on the same court using the same hoops, and the final score is displayed on the same scoreboard for everyone to see. From the stands, it looks like a fair contest. But what if you found out one team had a different referee? What if one team's rulebook had a few extra pages, a few extra clauses that the other team didn't have? What if one team got to pick its most athletic players, while the other team had to accept anyone from the neighborhood who wanted to play, regardless of their skill level? Suddenly, the final score on that board doesn't tell the whole story. It might not even tell the right story. This is the heart of the debate over accountability in American education. Let's start with the referees, the governing bodies. For a traditional public school, the line of accountability is, at least on paper, crystal clear. It's governed by a local school district, which is run by a superintendent and overseen by a school board. And who puts that school board in power? You do. The local taxpayers, the parents, the community members, they are elected officials. If you have a problem with the policy, with the curriculum, with how your tax dollars are being spent, you can show up to a public school board meeting. You can speak your mind during the public comment period. You can organize with other parents, and come election time you can vote them out. It's a direct, sometimes messy, but fundamentally democratic process. The school is directly accountable to the entire community it serves. Now let's look at the charter school team. Their referee is different. A charter school is typically governed by a private, non-profit board of directors. These are not elected officials. They are usually appointed, a group of founders, community leaders, or education experts who are passionate about the school's mission. Their meetings might be public, but the board members themselves are not directly accountable to the voters at the ballot box. Their primary accountability is to something called an authorizer. The authorizer is the entity that grants the school its charter in the first place. This could be the local school district, a state university, a state education agency, or a special state-level chartering board. The authorizer's job is to be the watchdog. They review the charter school's academic performance, its financial health, and its operational stability. And here's the key difference, the part that charter advocates will point to as the ultimate form of accountability. If the school fails to meet the specific goals laid out in its charter contract, the authorizer can revoke the charter and shut the school down. This is the central pillar of the charter school argument. It's a performance-based contract. Produce results or you cease to exist. Compare that to a traditional public school. It is exceedingly rare and politically difficult to shut down a failing public school. It can happen, but more often, they go through years of turnaround plans, state interventions, and restructuring efforts. So, on one hand you have democratic but perhaps slower accountability. On the other, you have market-based, high-stakes accountability. The threat of closure is a powerful motivator. Seems like a tougher, more rigorous standard. But this brings us to the scoreboard, standardized testing. For decades, the primary way we've measured a school's performance has been through annual state test scores in reading and math. And if a charter school's scores aren't high enough or don't grow fast enough, that's a black mark that could lead to its closure. This sounds fair. It sounds objective. But what if the two teams aren't made up of the same players? This is where the game gets complicated. A traditional neighborhood public school has a mandate that is absolute. It must accept every single child who lives within its geographical boundaries. Every single one. The gifted student, the student with severe and profound disabilities, the student who just arrived in the country and speaks no English, the student dealing with trauma and homelessness, the student with severe behavioral challenges. The doors are open to all, period. They have no choice. That is their fundamental promise to the public. A charter school, on the other hand, is a school of choice. No one is assigned to go there. Families have to seek it out, learn about it, and actively apply. Most popular charter schools have more applicants than seats, so they hold a random lottery to determine who gets in. This lottery system is designed to be fair and unbiased. But a crucial question arises. Who is entering the lottery in the first place? The very act of applying requires a certain level of parental engagement, of resources, of time and knowledge to navigate the system. This can create a self-selection effect. The families who are most proactive and involved are the ones most likely to apply, which can mean the student body at a charter school might, from day one, be different from the neighborhood school down the street. This has led to one of the most persistent and controversial criticisms of the charter movement, the idea of cream skimming or cherry-picking students. The allegation is that some charter schools, either intentionally or unintentionally, end up serving fewer of the most challenging and most expensive students to educate. Let's look at the two most prominent examples: students with disabilities and English language learners. Federal law requires charter schools to provide services for these students, just like traditional public schools. But for years, national data showed that, on average, charter schools enrolled a lower percentage of students with disabilities compared to nearby district schools. The gap has been closing in recent years due to legal pressure and evolving practices, but disparities can remain, especially when it comes to students with the most severe and costly disabilities. Why? Can be a complex mix of factors. A new charter school might not have the specialized staff or facilities built up yet. Parents of children with complex needs might be hesitant to leave a district that has a long-established, legally mandated support system. Then there's the issue of what happens after a student is enrolled. This is where we see the term counseling out. Imagine a student with behavioral issues who is struggling to adapt to a charter school's strict, no excuses, disciplinary code. A traditional public school would have to create a behavioral intervention plan and keep that student. It has no other option. In some charter schools, however, The pressure on the student and their family might become so great that they voluntarily withdraw and return to their local neighborhood school. The charter school doesn't officially expel them, but the student leaves nonetheless. This means the traditional public school system not only has to educate every child from the start, but it also acts as the safety net, reabsorbing students who couldn't make it, for whatever reason, in the charter environment. So let's go back to our basketball analogy. One team, the traditional public school, has to take every player that shows up, including those who have never touched a basketball before. The other team, the charter school, gets to run a tryout, a lottery, and the players who come to the tryout tend to be the ones who already own basketball shoes and have been practicing in their driveway. Furthermore, if a player on the charter team struggles to keep up during drills, they might get subtly encouraged to go back and play for the other team. When you look at it this way, seeing one team with a higher score on the scoreboard becomes less surprising. It doesn't automatically mean their coach is better. It doesn't automatically mean their strategy is superior. It means they are playing a fundamentally different game with a different set of rules and a different roster of players. The accountability of the threat of closure is real, but it's being applied in a different context. This isn't to say all charter schools operate this way. Many go to extraordinary lengths to recruit and retain a diverse student body that truly reflects their community. But the structural differences in governance, enrollment, and retention create a system where the two types of public schools are not being held to an identical standard of public service. They are both tasked with educating our children, but one is designed as a universal obligation, a public utility for all, while the other is designed as a specialized option, a boutique choice for some. Understanding this difference is not about declaring one good and one evil. It's about realizing that when we compare them, we are often comparing apples and oranges. And if we're going to judge them by the same metric, by the same score, we have to first ask if they were ever truly playing the same game to begin with. The answer, in many critical ways, is no. And that realization forces us to look beyond the simple test scores and ask a much deeper question. What are these different models actually producing? What do the results truly tell us about success and failure in American education? To answer that, we have to go back to the mid-1990s to a classroom in Houston, Texas. Two young teachers, Dave Levin and Mike Feinberg, were part of the Teach for America program, placed in a low-income public school. They were ambitious, idealistic, and deeply frustrated. They saw incredible potential in their fifth-grade students, but felt trapped by a system that seemed to expect very little from them. So they made a pact. They created a program within the school, a pilot program built on a simple, radical idea. What if you took the ethos of a high-end private prep school, the high expectations, the rigorous curriculum, the focus on character, and applied it to a public school classroom in one of America's poorest neighborhoods? They called it the Knowledge is Power Program, or KIPP, and it became the blueprint for the most famous, most influential, and most controversial type of charter school in America, the No Excuses model. The name itself tells you almost everything you need to know. No excuses for not doing your homework. No excuses for not paying attention. No excuses from teachers if students weren't learning, and no excuses from parents for not being involved. The core belief was that poverty was not a destiny. A child's zip code did not have to determine their future. The problem wasn't the kids. It was the low expectations of the system around them. The solution? A total environmental overhaul. So what did that look like in practice? It looked like a longer school day, running from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. It looked like a longer school year, with classes on Saturdays and for 3 weeks during the summer. It meant more time on task, more time spent on core subjects like math and reading. It meant a culture of extreme order and strict discipline. Students wore uniforms. They walked in silent, single-file lines. In the classroom, they were taught specific behavioral protocols like the SLANT method. Sit up straight, listen, ask and answer questions, nod your head, and track the speaker with your eyes. Every minute was structured. Every behavior was managed. The goal was to eliminate distractions and maximize instructional time. But it went deeper than just discipline. The entire culture was relentlessly focused on a single goal: college. Homerooms weren't named after teachers. They were named after the universities their teachers attended: Penn, Yale, Berkeley. Banners from top colleges hung in every hallway. The constant message, repeated like a mantra from the first day of 5th grade, was work hard, be nice, to and through college. It was a demanding, all-encompassing environment. Students, parents, and teachers all had to sign a contract, a pledge to commit to the KIPP way. And in the beginning, the results were nothing short of astonishing. These schools, filled with students who were overwhelmingly low-income and minority, started producing test scores that didn't just match their affluent suburban counterparts, they often exceeded them. In the early 2000s, studies began to emerge showing massive learning gains for KIPP students. One famous study out of Mathematica Policy Research found that after 3 years, KIPP middle schoolers were, on average, a full 11 months ahead of their peers in math and 8 months ahead in reading. This was the silver bullet everyone in education reform had been searching for. It was proof of concept. It suggested that the achievement gap wasn't an intractable problem of poverty and societal inequity. It was a problem of school culture and instructional quality. And if it could be solved in one school, it could be solved in all of them. Money began pouring in from philanthropists like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation. KIPP went from a single classroom in Houston to a national network of over 270 schools. And a wave of other no excuses networks followed in its wake. Achievement First, Uncommon Schools, Success Academy. They became the face of the charter school movement, celebrated in documentaries like Waiting for Superman, as the heroic saviors of American education. For a decade, their success seemed undeniable. The data was clear. The model worked. But then the questions started. Quietly at first, then louder. The model worked, yes, but for whom? And at what cost? Critics began to point out that the rigid, compliance-focused environment, while effective at raising test scores, might be coming at a steep price. They argued that the constant focus on discipline and control was stifling creativity, critical thinking, and student autonomy. Was the goal to create scholars or just really well-behaved test takers? Former students started speaking out, describing the intense pressure, the anxiety, the feeling that any small mistake could lead to public shaming or demerits. They talked about a culture that felt more like a boot camp than a school, one that demanded they shed parts of their own culture and identity to conform to a rigid, predetermined mold of success. Then there was the issue of attrition. While these schools boasted impressive graduation rates and college acceptance numbers, critics asked, what about the students who didn't make it to graduation day? Research began to show that no excuses schools often had higher rates of student turnover than traditional public schools. Students who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the strict behavioral codes often left, or were counseled out. This led to the most damning accusation of all, the creaming or skimming effect. The charge was that these schools, even with a lottery system, weren't taking the most difficult to educate students. The demanding contracts, the long hours, and the intense parent involvement requirements naturally selected for the most motivated families. And the students who struggled with behavioral issues, had learning disabilities, or simply didn't fit the mold were pushed out, their departure conveniently cleansing the school's data pool and making the results for the remaining students look even more impressive. The schools vehemently denied this. They argued that they took all students who won the lottery, and that student mobility was a challenge for all schools in high-poverty areas. But the perception stuck, and it created a deep fundamental schism in how we view their success. Are these schools miracle workers, proving that demography is not destiny? Or are they meticulously curated environments that succeed by removing the very students a true public system is obligated to serve? The truth, as it so often is messy and complicated. There is no doubt that for many students, these schools were a lifeline. They provided a safe, orderly, and ambitious environment that was a stark contrast to the chaotic and under-resourced schools they would have otherwise attended. They put hundreds of thousands of low-income, first-generation students on the path to college, changing the trajectory of their lives and their families' lives forever. The No Excuses model offered a clear bargain. Submit to our structure, follow our rules, and we will give you a ticket to the middle class. It was a bargain that seemed almost too good to be true. Get into college, escape poverty. All you had to do was sacrifice a piece of your childhood. And for years, almost everyone agreed it was a price worth paying. But then the stories started to come out. The stories from the kids who survived it. And at the exact same time, a completely different kind of charter school was emerging from the shadows, one built not on control and compliance, but on freedom and creativity. This new model didn't look like a school, at least not in the way most of us remember. There were no single-file lines in the hallways, no silent lunches, no demerits for an untucked shirt or for looking at a classmate the wrong way. Instead, there was a kind of vibrant, managed chaos. The sound wasn't the rhythmic chanting of multiplication tables. It was the buzz of collaboration, the whirring of tools, the passionate debate of teenagers hashing out an idea. This was the anti-KIPP, the philosophical opposite of the No Excuses movement. Its core belief was that the goal of education wasn't to mold children into compliant test takers, but to unleash their innate curiosity and teach them how to think, create, and solve complex problems. The philosophy behind these schools is often called project-based learning or deeper learning, and the idea is deceptively simple. Instead of breaking knowledge into isolated subjects, math for 50 minutes, then English, then history, you integrate them into a single meaningful project. You don't just learn about the physics of bridges. You form a team, design a bridge, and build a model that can withstand a certain amount of weight. In the process, you're forced to use math for your calculations, history to understand classic architectural designs, and English to present your final project to a panel of judges, maybe even real-life engineers. The learning isn't passive, it's active. It's not something that's done to you, it's something you do. And perhaps the most famous and influential example of this model is a network of charter schools that started in San Diego called High Tech High. The origin story of High Tech High is itself a perfect example of this problem-solving ethos. In the late 1990s, a group of business leaders in San Diego, particularly from the booming tech and biotech industries, had a problem. They were looking to hire, but they found that graduates from local high schools, even the ones with great grades and test scores, were missing something. They could follow instructions, but they couldn't innovate. They could memorize formulas, but they couldn't apply them to new, messy, real-world challenges. They lacked the skills of collaboration, critical thinking, and communication that the modern economy demanded. So they approached a man named Larry Rosenstock. Rosenstock wasn't your typical school administrator. He'd been a carpenter, a lawyer who worked with inner-city youth, and a professor of education at Harvard. He saw the disconnect immediately. He saw that traditional schools were designed for the industrial age, to produce workers who could sit in neat rows and perform repetitive tasks. But the world had changed. He envisioned a school that was less like a factory and more like a modern R&D lab. When the first High Tech High opened its doors in the year 2000, it was a radical experiment. There were no bells telling students when to switch classes. The teachers weren't called teachers, they were called designers of learning experiences. The school itself was located in a converted naval training center, a wide-open industrial space that felt more like a startup incubator than a high school. And from day one, the focus was on projects. Big, ambitious, public-facing projects. Imagine walking into a school like this. In one corner, you see a group of 9th graders building a human-powered submarine for a national competition. They're arguing about hydrodynamics, welding metal, and programming sensors. To do this, they need to understand physics, calculus, and engineering. In another area, a team of 11th graders is putting the final touches on a museum-quality exhibit about the history of immigration in their community. They've spent months conducting oral history interviews, digging through archives, writing narrative panels, and designing the physical layout. They've become historians, journalists, and graphic designers all at once. Another group might be publishing a full-length book of scientific essays on the bioethics of gene editing, a book that will actually be sold on Amazon. This isn't a book report that only a teacher will read. It's a real product for a real audience. The stakes are high, the work matters, and that changes everything. Changes the motivation. You're not working for a grade anymore. You're working because you're part of a team trying to create something genuinely great. You're trying not to let your teammates down. This approach fundamentally redefines the role of the teacher. The teacher is no longer the sage on the stage, the single source of knowledge who lectures from the front of the room. Instead, they are the guide on the side. They're a project manager, a coach, a mentor. Their job isn't to give students the answers, but to help them ask better questions and find the resources to answer them on their own. The relationship is built on trust and mutual respect, not fear and compliance. The core principle is student agency. The idea that students should have a voice and a choice in what and how they learn. Now, as you can imagine, when this model first appeared, the critics pounced. They called it soft, unstructured, arts and crafts school. They looked at this beautiful chaos and saw a lack of rigor. The no excuses advocates were especially skeptical. They argued that this kind of freedom and creativity was a luxury, that what low-income students of color really needed was structure, discipline, and a relentless focus on foundational skills in reading and math to close the achievement gap. They would ask, "This is all very nice, but where's the data? Show us the test scores." They believed this project-based approach was a recipe for academic disaster, a feel-good experiment that would leave kids unprepared for the realities of college and the workforce. It was a powerful critique, and it tapped into a deep-seated fear in American education, the fear of falling behind. For decades, the entire system had been optimized for a single metric of success: the standardized test score. It was the one thing everyone, parents, politicians, real estate agents, seemed to understand. A school was good if its scores were high, and bad if they were low. It was simple, clean, and brutally efficient. So high-tech high-end schools like it had to prove that their model wasn't just a nice idea, but that it actually worked by the standards the rest of the world cared about. They had to prove that by pursuing deeper learning, students wouldn't fall behind on the basics. And so the data started to come in. Year after year, the results were stunning. Not only were high-tech high students producing incredible professional quality work, but they were also getting into college. Not just any college either. A huge percentage of their graduates, many of whom were low-income and the first in their families to go to college, were being accepted into the prestigious University of California system and other top-tier universities across the country. And here's the ultimate irony, the twist that turned the entire debate on its head. Their standardized test scores were great too. It turned out that when you teach a student how to deeply understand a complex historical text to make a documentary, they also, incidentally, get very good at the reading comprehension section of the SAT. When you require them to use advanced mathematical principles to build a functioning robot, they also, as a side effect, master the concepts on the state math test. The test scores weren't the goal. They were a byproduct of authentic, engaging work. High-tech high proved that you didn't have to choose between rigor and creativity. You could have both. So by the mid-2000s, the charter school landscape had fractured into these two opposing camps, two radically different answers to the question of what a school should be. On one side, you had the no-excuses boot camps, built on order, discipline, and relentless test prep. On the other, you had the deeper learning creative labs built on trust, autonomy, and complex real-world projects. Both models were producing results that made the traditional public school system look slow and outdated. Both were attracting passionate supporters and devoted teachers. And both were competing for the same public funding and, most importantly, for the same students. This created a fascinating and deeply consequential situation. If you're a parent, especially in a city with a lot of charter options, you're faced with an incredible choice. Do you send your child to the school that promises a straight, narrow, and proven path to college, even if it means sacrificing some of their childhood freedom? Or do you send them to the school that promises to ignite their creativity and passion, even if the path feels a bit more unstructured and uncertain? Both of these wildly different models could claim success. So what does that say about the system itself? And more importantly, who gets to decide which model a child ends up in? The answer to that question reveals the most controversial, and perhaps the most important part of the entire charter school story: the lottery. The lottery. It sounds like something you do for a cash prize, a long-shot gamble for a life-changing windfall. But in the world of American education, for hundreds of thousands of families every year, the lottery isn't about money. It's about a child's future. And it is, without a doubt, the most heart-wrenching, controversial, and revealing part of the charter school experiment. So why does it even exist? The answer lies at the very core of the charter school promise. Because charter schools are publicly funded, they are legally required to be open to all students. They cannot have selective admission requirements like a private school. They can't demand a certain GPA, an entrance exam, or an interview. If a child lives in the designated geographic area, they are eligible to apply. But what happens when a school designed for 200 kindergartners gets 1,000 applications? They can't accept everyone, and they can't pick and choose based on who they think will be the best student. That would be cherry-picking or creaming, skimming the most advantaged or highest-achieving students off the top, leaving the traditional public schools with the most challenging populations. To prevent this, federal and state laws mandate a solution. If a charter school is oversubscribed, it must use a random lottery to decide who gets a spot. On paper, it's the fairest system imaginable. Every application goes into the pool, and every applicant has the exact same statistical chance of being selected. A child's academic history, their parents' income, their race, their special needs status, none of it matters. The fate of their application rests entirely on the impartial hand of random chance. But what does that actually look like for a family? Imagine you're a parent in a district where the local elementary school is chronically underfunded, has a reputation for being unsafe, and has test scores in the bottom 10% of the state. You've done your research. You've toured a local charter school. The classrooms are bright, the teachers seem energized, and they have an innovative curriculum focused on STEM that you know your daughter would love. This school feels like a lifeline. Feels like the one shot you have to put your child on a different path. So you fill out the application, a simple one-page form. And then you wait. For weeks, maybe months. Finally, the day of the lottery arrives. Sometimes it's a sterile digital affair. An email that lands in your inbox with a subject line that makes your heart stop. But often, especially in the early days of the movement, it was a public spectacle. Imagine a school auditorium, packed with hundreds of anxious parents. The air is thick with a mixture of hope and desperation. On stage, a principal stands next to a large, transparent drum filled with ping-pong balls, each bearing a number that corresponds to an applicant. The principal spins the drum, reaches in and pulls out the first ball. They read the number aloud. A gasp, then a shriek of joy from one corner of the room as a family realizes their child is in. They've won. The principal pulls another ball. And another. With each number called, a wave of relief washes over one family, while the odds get just a little bit worse for everyone else. You sit there, clutching your ticket, your palms sweating, whispering the number to yourself like a prayer. You watch as other parents around you begin to quietly cry, their shoulders slumping in defeat. The last available spot is called. It's not your number. Just like that, it's over. Your child's chance at that school, that lifeline, is gone. And it had nothing to do with their potential, their work ethic, or how much you love them. It was just bad luck. You have to walk out of that auditorium, take your child's hand, and tell them they'll be going to the other school after all, the one you were so desperately trying to help them escape. This scene, or its digital equivalent, plays out for hundreds of thousands of families every year. And it perfectly captures the central paradox of the charter school debate. Proponents of charter schools look at the lottery and see fairness and equity in action. They see a system that explicitly forbids discrimination and gives every single child, regardless of their background, an equal shot. They argue that the sheer existence of these long waitlists and desperate lotteries is the ultimate proof that the charter school model is working. It's a clear market signal. Parents are voting with their feet, demanding an alternative to a failing status quo. The lottery, in this view, isn't the problem. It's a symptom of the real problem, which is a lack of high-quality school options. The solution, they say, isn't to get rid of lotteries, but to open more charter schools to meet the overwhelming demand. Critics, however, look at the very same scene and see something else entirely. They see a deeply cruel and psychologically damaging system. They see a society that has abdicated its responsibility to provide a quality education for every child, and has instead outsourced that responsibility to a game of chance. They argue that celebrating a system that creates a few winners, while leaving the vast majority of children, the losers, behind in under-resourced schools is a moral failure. The lottery, in their view, creates a false narrative of choice. For the family whose number isn't called, there is no choice. They are simply left with the one option they were trying to avoid. Furthermore, critics argue that this process siphons off the most motivated and engaged families from the traditional public school system. The parents who take the time to research schools, fill out applications, and attend lotteries are often the same parents who would otherwise be powerful advocates for improving their local neighborhood school. When they win the lottery and leave, the traditional public school loses not just a student, but an engaged family, further weakening the institution for the children who remain. But the lottery does something else, something incredibly important from a research perspective. Because it's random, it creates the perfect conditions for a scientific experiment. Think about it. You have two groups of students who are, in every meaningful way, identical. Both groups have parents who are motivated enough to seek out and apply to a charter school. Both groups come from the same neighborhoods and have similar backgrounds. The only difference between them is that one group won the lottery and got into the charter school, and the other group lost and, in most cases, remained in their local public school. Researchers call this a randomized controlled trial, and it's considered the gold standard for determining cause and effect. By tracking these two groups of students over many years, researchers can isolate the impact of the school itself. If the lottery winners consistently outperform the lottery losers on metrics like test scores, high school graduation rates, and college attendance, you can be highly confident that the charter school is the cause of that difference. It's the most powerful tool we have to answer the question: do charter schools actually work? The results from these lottery studies have been extensive and often contradictory, fueling both sides of the debate, showing massive gains in some cities and negligible or even negative effects in others. And the system isn't always purely random. To add another layer of complexity, many charter schools are allowed to use weighted lotteries or give preferences. This means they can legally give a statistical advantage to certain groups of applicants, The most common preference is for siblings of current students. The logic is simple. It keeps families together. But the effect is that it significantly reduces the number of open spots available to the general public. Other common preferences include children of the school staff, and sometimes, students who live in the immediate school district or who are designated as at-risk, such as those from low-income families or English language learners. Each of these preferences is its own miniature debate. Is it fair to give siblings a leg up? Or does that just create a system where once one family gets in, they can dominate those spots for years to come? Should schools prioritize serving the students in their immediate neighborhood? Or should they be open to anyone in the city who wants a better option? These are not easy questions, and the answers reveal the deep tensions between the goals of community, equity, and individual choice. Ultimately, the lottery is more than just a mechanism for admission. It is a symbol. It represents the promise of a fresh start, a shot at a different future, a belief that a better education is possible. But it also represents a system of rationing, a brutal acknowledgement that we have not created enough good schools for all of our children. It turns a fundamental right, the right to a quality education, into a prize. For the families who win, it can be a moment of pure joy that changes the trajectory of a child's life. But for the vast majority who lose, it is a devastating reminder of the limits of choice and the profound, enduring power of the luck of the draw. It begs the question: is a system that relies on luck to distribute opportunity truly a step forward? Or is it an admission of a much deeper failure? This question of a deeper failure cuts to the very heart of the charter school promise, because the lottery, for all its cruelty, is a symptom of a much larger idea. The idea that schools shouldn't be permanent fixtures, guaranteed to exist year after year regardless of their performance. The foundational bargain of the charter movement was this: we will give you freedom, freedom from bureaucracy, freedom from the union contract, freedom to innovate, and in exchange you will be held to a higher standard of accountability. If you succeed, you will be rewarded with more students and more funding. But if you fail, you will be shut down. Period. This was revolutionary. Think about it. When was the last time you heard of a traditional public school being permanently closed simply for failing its students academically year after year? It almost never happens. They get new principals, new turnaround plans, state interventions, but the institution itself, the building and the system, endures. It's seen as a public utility, like the water department. You don't shut it down, you try to fix it. Charters proposed a different model, one borrowed from the free market: creative destruction. Bad schools would be pruned away, allowing good schools to flourish. It was a promise of a self-cleaning system, a meritocracy of education where only the strong survive. And sometimes that's exactly what happens. In cities across the country, authorizers, the bodies that grant and oversee charters, have done the politically difficult work of non-renewal. They've looked at a school's dismal test scores, its chaotic finances, or its failure to meet the promises in its charter, and they've pulled the plug. It's a brutal process. Families who have built a community within that school are suddenly cast adrift. Teachers lose their jobs. But the theory is that this short-term pain prevents long-term educational malpractice, saving future generations of students from attending a failing institution. In these instances, the system works as designed. Accountability isn't just a buzzword, it has teeth. But the reality of accountability is often far messier, more political, and more fraught than the simple theory suggests. The first major problem is defining failure. The easiest metric, and the one most often used, is standardized test scores. But is a single number on a single day a fair way to judge the complex ecosystem of a school? What if a school takes in students who are years behind grade level and manages to help them make 2, even 3 years of progress in a single year, yet they still don't pass the state test? Their growth is astounding, but by the simple measure of proficiency, they're a failure. What about a school that excels in the arts, or fosters an incredible sense of community and safety in a dangerous neighborhood, but its math scores are just average? Is that a school that deserves to be shut down? The promise of a clean, data-driven execution often runs headfirst into the messy human reality of what makes a school valuable. Then there's the sheer political force of a school fighting for its life. When a charter is threatened with closure, it doesn't just quietly accept its fate. It mobilizes. Hundreds of parents, students, and teachers show up to board meetings, pleading, crying, and demanding that their school, their community, be saved. They speak of the personal connections their children have made, the teachers who went the extra mile. They might acknowledge the test scores aren't perfect, but they'll argue that the school is more than a number. For an authorizer, often a local school board or a university panel, the pressure is immense. Closing a school, even a bad one, means disrupting hundreds of lives and facing a torrent of public anger. It's often politically easier to grant a short-term renewal, kick the can down the road, and hope things improve. And so, many underperforming charter schools, the very schools the system was designed to eliminate, are allowed to limp on for years. But there is a third, more terrifying scenario. It's not about a slow decline or a political battle. It's about catastrophic sudden collapse. Because with the freedom and autonomy granted to charters comes the freedom to fail spectacularly. We've seen it happen. A charter school, seemingly fine one day, suddenly announces it's closing its doors. Not at the end of the school year, but next week. Or even tomorrow. The reasons are often a toxic cocktail of mismanagement, incompetence, or outright fraud. A charismatic founder with a great educational vision but no financial sense runs the school into the ground. Public funds are misspent on lavish salaries, questionable real estate deals, or contracts with the board members' own companies. And because they operate with less oversight than a traditional district, by the time the financial rot is discovered, it's too late. The money is gone. The school is insolvent. And on a Tuesday morning, hundreds of parents get a text message: "Don't bring your kids to school tomorrow. It's closed. Forever." Imagine that shock. Imagine the scramble to find a new school mid-year. The trauma for a child whose community is vaporized overnight. These ghost schools are the ultimate nightmare scenario of the charter experiment. The stability and predictability of the traditional public school, for all its flaws, is something you take for granted. You know the doors will be open in September. In the most poorly regulated corners of the charter world, that guarantee evaporates. This risk is magnified exponentially when you introduce the most controversial player in the charter school landscape: the for-profit operator. While the majority of charter schools are run by nonprofit organizations, a significant and growing number are managed by for-profit companies, often called education management organizations, or EMOs. This introduces a fundamental conflict at the heart of the school's mission. Is the primary goal to educate children, or is it to generate a return for shareholders? The model works like this. The charter school itself is technically a nonprofit that holds the public charter, but it signs a sweeping management contract with a for-profit EMO. That company then handles almost everything: hiring and firing teachers, choosing the curriculum, managing the budget. In exchange, the EMO takes a management fee, typically 10 to 15% of the total public funding the school receives. Every dollar of taxpayer money that flows to the school is subject to this profit skim. The incentive structure this creates is deeply troubling to critics. Every dollar spent on a more experienced teacher, a smaller class size, a special education aid, or even new library books is a dollar cut from the company's bottom line. The drive for profit can create immense pressure to cut corners, to hire the cheapest, least experienced teachers, to spend as little as possible on classroom resources and student support. While many for-profit EMOs claim they can create efficiencies that allow them to make a profit while still delivering a quality education, the track record is shaky at best. Major multi-year studies from institutions like Stanford's Credo have consistently found that, on average, students in schools run by for-profit operators have weaker academic growth than students in nonprofit charters and even traditional public schools. It's a stark reminder that when the profit motive enters the classroom, the priorities can shift dramatically. The promise of accountability, already complicated, becomes even more so. Is an authorizer shutting down a school for academic failure, or because a distant corporation decided it was no longer a profitable asset? So we have a system of choice that often relies on the blind luck of a lottery, and a system of accountability that struggles to consistently weed out failure, and can sometimes lead to catastrophic collapse. And woven through it all is a powerful and growing corporate interest that seeks to turn public education dollars into private profit. But we've been talking about systems, about structures and incentives. What about the people on the front lines? What is it actually like to teach inside a charter school? The answer to that question reveals the single biggest battleground in the entire charter school war: a fight over unions, control, and the very soul of the teaching profession. To understand the charter school movement, you have to understand the teacher's contract, or more accurately, the lack of one. In a traditional public school, a teacher is typically a member of a union. That union collectively bargains with the school district to create a contract, a dense document that spells out everything from salary schedules and health benefits to class sizes and the number of hours a teacher is required to be in the building. It establishes due process, meaning a teacher can't just be fired on a whim. There's a procedure, a set of rules. For supporters, this system provides vital protections, stability, and a professional voice for educators. For critics, it's a fortress of bureaucracy, an engine of mediocrity that protects bad teachers and stifles innovation. Charter schools were designed to smash that fortress. The vast majority of charter schools, over 90%, are non-union shops. This is not an accident. It is a core feature of their design. The pitch to a young, idealistic teacher is intoxicating. Forget the rigid union rules. Forget the time-serving veterans who have lost their passion. Come here to our school. We are a family. We are on a mission. We don't have a 200-page contract. We have a shared vision. You will have the freedom to innovate, to try new things, to do whatever it takes to help children succeed. There's no red tape, just results. And for many teachers, especially at the beginning, this is exhilarating. They feel empowered. They can create a new lesson plan on a Sunday night and implement it Monday morning without needing a dozen approvals. They can collaborate with colleagues to completely redesign the 7th grade math curriculum over the summer. The energy in the best charter schools can be electric, a palpable sense of shared purpose that is often missing in large, impersonal public school districts. Teachers talk about feeling like pioneers building something new from the ground up. But then, the reality of the model begins to set in. That freedom starts to look a lot like something else. The lack of a union contract means that most charter school teachers are at-will employees. This is a legal term with a very simple and brutal meaning. You can be fired at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. Did the principal not like your tone in a staff meeting? You could be let go. Are your students' test scores not rising fast enough? Your contract might not be renewed, with no explanation given. This creates a pervasive culture of fear and compliance. The freedom to innovate can quickly become the pressure to conform to a specific, top-down instructional model dictated by the charter network's leadership. Step out of line and you're gone. Then there are the hours. The mantra in many charter schools is, whatever it takes. On the surface, it's an inspiring call to action. In practice, it's a recipe for burnout. The school day is often longer. The school year is often longer. Teachers are expected to be available to students and parents by phone or email late into the evening. They're not just teachers, they're also lunch monitors, after-school tutors, club advisors, and home visit coordinators, often with no additional pay for these duties. A 60 or 70-hour work week is not uncommon. While traditional public school teachers certainly work long hours, the union contract at least draws a line in the sand. It defines the workday. In the charter world, that line doesn't exist. The job is never done. This relentless pace has a predictable consequence: an astonishing rate of teacher turnover. National studies have consistently shown that teachers are far more likely to leave charter schools than traditional public schools. Some charter networks see turnover rates of 30, 40, or even 50% in a single year. Imagine half the staff of your local hospital or fire department quitting every year. It would be considered a crisis. In the charter sector, it's often dismissed as part of the model, a way to weed out those who aren't committed enough. Proponents argue this is a feature, not a bug. They call it performance management. If a teacher isn't getting results, they should be replaced by someone who can. This keeps the teaching staff young, energetic, and cheap, as salaries don't have to increase with experience. But critics see a churn-and-burn model that treats teachers as disposable cogs in a machine. It relies on a constant stream of young, inexperienced, and low-cost educators who are willing to sacrifice their lives for a few years before burning out and leaving the profession entirely. This high turnover destabilizes schools. It breaks the crucial bonds between teachers, students, and families. A student might have a completely different set of teachers from one year to the next, destroying any sense of community and continuity. This is the battleground. On one side, you have charter leaders who argue that unions are an obstacle to excellence. They claim that union contracts protect ineffective teachers, block performance-based pay, and prevent schools from making the nimble decisions needed to serve students. They believe that the at-will, non-union model is essential for maintaining a high-performing, mission-driven culture. On the other side, you have a growing movement of charter school teachers who are fighting back. They argue that they are professionals who deserve a voice, respect, and basic labor protections. They want due process so they can't be fired unfairly. They want a say in the curriculum they are forced to teach. They want reasonable working hours so they can have a life outside of school and build a sustainable career. They want to turn a temporary gig into a lifelong profession. And so across the country, a quiet but fierce war is being waged school by school. Teachers and charter networks in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York have begun organizing unions. The pushback from charter management organizations is often immediate and intense. When teachers try to unionize, they are often met with a sophisticated and well-funded anti-union campaign. Charter networks hire expensive consultants who specialize in what they call union avoidance. Mandatory meetings are held where teachers are warned about the high cost of union dues and told that a union will create an adversarial, us versus them culture. Per-union teachers report being isolated, intimidated, or even fired under flimsy pretenses. Why do the networks fight so hard? Because unionization strikes at the very heart of their business model. A union contract would mean higher labor costs, as it would require a salary schedule that rewards experience. It would mean less control, as teachers would have a legally protected voice in school policy. It would mean an end to at-will employment and the long uncompensated hours. It would, in essence, make charter schools look a lot more like the traditional public schools they were created to replace. The fight over unionization reveals the fundamental tension within the charter school movement. Is the goal to create sustainable long-term community institutions with stable, experienced professional teaching staffs? Or is the goal to create lean, efficient, results-driven organizations that prioritize flexibility and low costs above all else? The answer to that question isn't just about labor rights. It's about the kind of education we are providing to our children. A school's working conditions are its students' learning conditions. A system that burns through its teachers may produce impressive short-term test scores, but what is the long-term human cost? What does it teach our children about loyalty, community, and the value of a dedicated professional? We've now seen the political battles, the funding fights, and the war for the soul of the teaching profession. We've looked at the data, the promises, and the controversies, but we've saved the most important question for last. After all of this, the money, the politics, the debate, what is the actual on-the-ground impact on the people this entire experiment is supposed to serve? What is the final verdict for the students and the communities at the heart of the charter school story? The answer, it turns out, is not a single verdict. It's a mosaic of millions of individual stories, each one a universe of hope, frustration, triumph, and disappointment. For every student who finds a lifeline in a charter school, there's another story, a different reality that we have to look at with just as much honesty. Imagine a student, let's call her Maya. She lives in a neighborhood where the local public school has been underfunded for decades. The classes are overcrowded, the textbooks are falling apart, and the best teachers keep leaving. For Maya, school is less about learning and more about surviving the day. Then, a new charter school opens. It has a lottery system. Her parents, desperate for a better option, put her name in. And against all odds, her number is called. Feels like winning the actual lottery. Suddenly, Maya is in a school with small classes, brand new computers, and a strict focused curriculum on STEM. Her teachers are demanding but passionate. They call her parents if she misses a single assignment. For the first time, she feels seen. She feels challenged. She starts to believe she can go to college. For years later, she does. For Maya and for thousands of students like her, the charter school wasn't just an alternative. It was a rescue mission. It was the tangible fulfillment of the American promise that your zip code doesn't have to define your destiny. But now let's imagine another student, Leo. He's in that same charter school. He's a bright kid, but he has ADHD and struggles with impulse control. The school's rigid no excuses policy, the same one that helps Maya focus, feels like a cage to Leo. He gets demerits for fidgeting, for speaking out of turn, for not tracking the speaker with his eyes. He's constantly in detention. The school doesn't have the same level of special education resources as the public school district. His parents are called in for meetings, not about how to help him succeed, but about how he isn't a good fit for the school's culture. The pressure mounts until his parents, exhausted and feeling like they failed, withdraw him and re-enroll him in the very public school Maya left. Leo is now back where he started, but with a new label: the kid who couldn't make it. For him, the charter school wasn't a lifeline. It was a sorting mechanism, a place that succeeded in part by quietly counseling out the students it wasn't designed to serve. And what about the 20 other kids who put their names in the lottery for that one spot Maya won? For them, the existence of the charter school changes nothing, except perhaps to reinforce the idea that a good education is a scarce prize you have to be lucky to win, not a fundamental right everyone deserves. This complex reality extends to the teachers as well. You have the young, idealistic educator who joins a charter, inspired by its mission. They work 80-hour weeks for less pay than their public school counterparts, with no union protections. They pour their heart and soul into their students. They see incredible results and feel like they're part of something revolutionary. But after 3 or 4 years, they're completely burned out. The relentless pace is unsustainable. They leave the profession altogether. Another casualty of a model that often runs on the passion and sacrifice of its workforce. Then you have the veteran teacher at the neighborhood public school. She watches as the charter opens down the street. She sees some of her most engaged students and their highly involved parents leave. Her school's budget is cut because enrollment is down. Her class size goes from 25 to 32. She's now tasked with educating a higher concentration of students with the most profound needs. More English language learners, more students with severe learning disabilities, more kids dealing with trauma at home, but with fewer resources than ever before. For her, the charter school isn't a friendly competitor sparking innovation. It's an existential threat that's destabilizing her school and making an already impossible job even harder. So, when we zoom out and look at the whole picture, what is the final verdict? It's this: the charter school movement, after more than 30 years, is not the silver bullet it was promised to be. It has not, on a grand scale, revolutionized American education. The data is stubbornly mixed. Some charter schools are spectacular engines of opportunity. Others are dismal failures. And the vast majority perform about the same as their public school counterparts. But to say it's a failure would also be untrue. The charter experiment has been one of the most important and disruptive educational laboratories in a century. It forced a conversation we desperately needed to have about the status quo. It proved that when you give schools autonomy, when you free them from bureaucracy, when you create a strong and focused school culture, amazing things can happen. The very best charter schools provided a powerful proof of concept. They showed us what's possible. The tragedy, however, is that instead of taking those lessons, smaller schools, more autonomy, strong leadership, accountability, and figuring out how to apply them universally across all public schools, we created a parallel system. A competitive, market-based system. And in any market, there are winners and losers. The result is a landscape of inequality. We've allowed the conversation to be framed as a zero-sum game. Charter versus public. Us versus them. This entire debate has been a proxy war for a much deeper, more fundamental question about our society. Is public education a public good? A shared responsibility we all invest in for the benefit of all children? Or is it a private commodity, a product that parents as consumers should be able to shop for, with the best products going to the savviest or luckiest shoppers? The charter school story is the story of that conflict. It's the story of our highest ideals of opportunity crashing into the messy realities of funding, politics, and human nature. It's revealed our collective desire for something better, but also our profound disagreement on how to get there. So, what exactly is a charter school? It's a publicly funded, privately managed school. But it's also more than that. It's a symbol. For some, it's a symbol of hope, innovation, and freedom from a broken system. For others, it's a symbol of privatization, inequality, and the erosion of a fundamental public trust. The final truth is that charter schools are not the answer to the problems in American education. They are a reflection of those problems. They are the product of a system where, for too long, we have allowed quality education to be a privilege, not a right. And perhaps the most enduring legacy of the charter school experiment won't be the schools themselves, but the unavoidable question they force us all to confront. What do we owe each other? And what kind of public school system for all children are we truly willing to build?